what with the massively successful raid stream and all the other things going on, it actually took me a while to get into the new map of this release, but finally I can sit here and say, wow, the Jahai Bluffs are awesome. Possibly, no, definitely the best map that we've had this season so far, and I guess that also puts it as the best map they've done in Living World full stop, right? Because the maps now are so much bigger, they have so many more features like races and adventures and bounties and everything else that goes on top. This map is friggin' sweet. I wanted to talk about what you guys might be missing out on if you haven't paid much attention to it yet, give some feedback, and note all the cool things the devs are doing here now that they weren't with other releases, and just as many of the areas I've now been geeking out as a Guild Wars 1 player. Now, if you saw it last week, I did do a tour of this region of the world back in Guild Wars 1, and we knew the map was called the Jahai Bluffs, so I showed you the Jahai Bluffs, plus a few other nearby things, but not much. Well, yeah, the map is the Jahai Bluffs, plus a whole lot more. A lot of those ancillary areas we were hoping for totally arrived. The Chantry of Secrets, for example, totally arrives. In fact, that's the first thing you see when you get to the map, as well as several of the other Guild Wars 1 sections. So there's a huge chunk to get through, and yeah, I guess I'll just go through some of the things that really excited me. First of all, the map does connect to Vabi. It's big enough that it goes all the way north to Vabi. I mean, kind of. They don't fully connect. They suggest that there's a cave linking between the two. And it also connects to Corner, the domain of Corner, that is, to the south. So that does mean there is one contiguous long route you can now take from the Amnoon Oasis, or even further north in the Shiver Peaks amongst the Dwarven ruins up in the Desert Highlands. You can walk from there all the way through the entirety of the Path of Fire expansion on these huge maps, get down to the south of Vabi, and now there's a new doorway and cave that's opened up that takes you to this map. South of this map is a really nice nondescript portal that gets you to Corner. Now, I don't have an account that only has this release and not the prior one, so I don't know what kind of error message the devs throw on screen if you try to utilize that portal when you don't technically own the content, but I have to assume it will just be some kind of pop-up that says, hey, are you keen on this next episode of Living World that you're missing out on? Which is going to be great for their sales, right? The only reason I even mention this is because, funnily enough, the new Raid Wing, which is supposed to be tied to Path of Fire as an expansion, they actually forgot to do that. So, like, free-to-play accounts and core accounts and HOT-only accounts can actually visit the Mystic Forge for now. Maybe the devs patched that out, but that was kind of an interesting thing that maybe they messed up on this area of the map too. So what does this mean? Well, you get that beautiful, long, immersive travel through the world, and fingers crossed, if the devs play their cards right, and we eventually get the land bridge up here between Fields of Ruin and the Desert Highlands. Now, granted, that would be a bit of an epic map. Maybe they could do two. If we ever get these, it will unlock access from the most southern coast. Realistically, I mean, we do have Istan, but that's an island. Can we expect to travel to the island? From the most southern areas of Gandhara all the way to Corteria, all the way through Ascalon, and even to a place like maybe Dragon's Stand or Bitterfrost Frontier. One day we could even get coast-to-coast travel, guys. Think of the Beetle races. It'd be so good. So yeah, that was one of the first things I actually saw. Just through coincidence, I ended up coming to the port of the south of the map, and I really enjoyed it. Another awesome thing that struck me on a totally different topic with this map is Ambient Dialogue. The devs have definitely done something new here, and I have to take note of it because I think a lot of players might not have realized. It's one of those systems that does everything right, but unless you're paying close attention, you might not realize anything's changed at all. So the way that Guild Wars 2 maps worked up till now is they'll have NPCs littered all throughout them that you can press F on for dialogue, but if you stand around for long enough, eventually they may talk about other things. And a lot of the best dialogue in the game is delivered through those conversations that rarely spawn between NPCs, and you as a player have no choice to trigger or opportunity to hear about. And so in Corteria, that's a huge thing. Those of you guys watching my LP, I'm spending hours, most episodes, making sure I can stand around listening to NPCs to find the juiciest lore that they'll finally speak about so I can edit it in. Most players miss all of that exposition, and some of the coolest like details about the char and about ore and all kinds of things come purely through that. It's always frustrated me. Living World as well, Season 3, Season 4, these two have upped the ante massively. The expansions have upped the ante. There's still a ton of that ambient dialogue, and while it triggers a bit more now, it can still be really fiddly to hear. There are still, for example, huge quantities of dialogue that does exist in games, say here at the Sandswept Isles, or in Istan, that, and even the Season 3 maps, that isn't on Wiki, just because it's so rarely heard by people who would actually document it. And it means we, the players, have always missed out. But they're doing something beautiful on this new map. Truly beautiful. And I can think of no better place to demonstrate it than coming down here to the Packed Vanguard for you all. That ambient dialogue now triggers phased based on proximity. So it will play for you on your client, and only you on your client will hear it. But you can sort of have a guarantee that you'll find something comes up. So right now, if I stand here, I won't hear any ambient dialogue. But as I walk around...
Can't believe I missed the Festival of the Four Winds. Again.
The snacks, the pretty ships, the snacks, the mixed drinks, the snacks. Oh, the sideshows, and the snacks. But we had, and have...
We can actually trigger this on demand. And, you know, as you walk over to some of the other people, you can be sure that their conversations will be the ones that trigger as you walk nearby. Like these guys here talking about Almora. If I walk away from them and then walk back, I'll get some dialogue about Logan from them and stuff. It's so cool. And we'll make, especially like, and I don't just say this as a YouTuber that's excited to share all of this with you guys one day in the LP and it's no longer a pain in the ass. I say this as just a fan of the game. It means everybody will get that extra detail. The first time I did the heart in this area of the world was phenomenal to me because the chatter was so evident and so perfectly spliced in too. Because it's only like tied to WASD, unlike before in the game where you'd be in the middle of, you know, pressing F on something or in the middle of an existing dialogue window, this triggers as you walk in range of people where you're probably going to be receptive to hearing a new conversation anyway. So the flow is just great. I wish the entire game was like this at this point because this is the perfect implementation and it's something they've been doing on this map and newly on this map. So that's quite nice. Another cool perk and interesting thing I noted about the Jahai Bluffs is look at the shape of it. It's like a horseshoe. And I mean, even huge sections of it here is like the command post and Sun's Refuge, which isn't technically part of the map. It's not like one of these bog standard rectangles the devs have always been doing and people have complained about. They've sort of altered the sizes and shapes of the maps a little bit recently, but this is a pretty big deviation right now. I don't know whether eventually if they'll fill in some of the more wonky areas here, but I really like this, and it gives a really cool hint at the brand here, even though we can't quite travel to the surface terrain up there. I know a lot of people haven't liked that kind of immersive feel of them all being rectangles, especially a POF I felt like did this a lot. Well, they kind of get around that with the Domain of Corner. Not the Domain of Corner, sorry. The Jahai Bluffs within Corner. Interesting to see how the two maps pair off like that, right? So, yeah, let's talk about some more nitty-gritty details. There is, of course, on this map, a volatile magic trader. They do have available most of the standard things, basic gear for you, obsidian shards. You do get a node for your home instance for the new currency that's available here, or gathering currency, that being Mistonium nodes. So you'll be able to pick that up with 10,000 unbound magic. There's a portal scroll as well here. Now, interestingly on this release, because you get the main map, Jahai Bluffs, and a very substantial second ancillary map, the Sun's Refuge, there's actually portal scrolls for each. So interesting story about this. A long while ago now, that shaman data mined that this season's portal scroll had 7 slots in it. 7. So way back when Istan came out, the idea was, oh wow, maybe season 4 will have 7 episodes. I guess it won't then, since now we know that one of them has gone to the Sun's Refuge. That means probably we'll have a 6-episode season here for season 4, and then we'll move on. And not to an expansion as we've now learned, but to season 5. So that's kind of cool. You can get your next pull, obviously. And then also at the node vendor, there is the new armor set Requiem stuff. A lot of the vendor wares are locked off, in truth, until you beat the story and until you start progressing on various achievements. But it really gives me that sense that there should be a lot to do here for a while now. Obviously, that aspect of the map, as I'm really just giving my first impressions here, I won't be able to talk about yet. But I hope that there's a lot of longevity here and reason to return and do things. As we saw, maybe the Domain of Corner, well, not maybe. The Domain of Corner was definitely lacking on with the prior release. So another really cool perk, right? and I have to geek out about this, another complaint I've had, or a little thing I'd like to see about the game change, is Masteries. So, let's talk about this. How many Masteries are there in Guild Wars 2 at this point? A lot. We got a big collection of Heart of Thorns ones, including Living World Season 3 stuff. We've got some Central Tyrian ones, which, you know, are kind of not really relevant. And we have the POF Mount ones. So, when it comes to Season 4, largely speaking, and the expansion, we haven't seen any of the prior Masteries have much use. We don't find adrenaline mushrooms in the desert very much. We don't find updrafts and ley lines and all the things that we learned about before. Now, over this living world, and that was one of my big criticisms of the game going forward, what's the point in the mastery system if it doesn't continue to pay dividends later with, you know, that horizontal new ability to traverse landscapes and stuff. Now, over the season, the devs have filtered a little bit in. If you guys remember, in the Sandswept Isles, there are some areas where there's, like, poison, and you can survive a bit better if you have the Heart of Thorns mastery. With the other recent release, the Domain of Corner, there was actually a little bit of extra dialogue unlocking at the Hecate village if you had learned to communicate with the Hylek. Very inconsequential. Well, this map actually truly gives us worthwhile uses for HOT masteries. Guys, in the Jahai Bluffs, there are adrenaline mushrooms, there are ley lines, there are updrafts, there are, very importantly as well, beetle walls. So if you have the previous release, you got PE, you wanted to smash through a ton more walls, they are there. That was one of my big concerns from the previous release. The devs have actually done it. I'd like to see even more. Keep going with it, Arena. More. But, like, just wandering around and finding an adrenaline mushroom just out there in the fields was so brilliant. And it's not a question of taste or immersion or plausibility. It's a question of the game mechanics and feeling awesome for having beaten both expansions. And those have got to be great sales points for any POF-only players, right? As they're now in this map, they're like, oh, what is this? Maybe I will actually pick up HOT. It's just healthy design, and it's brilliant. The only downside, as far as I can see, and maybe I'm wrong on this, because this is really my first sweep through the map, you have to correct me if I am, guys, in the comment. I haven't seen any Season 3 masteries. So, traveling into volcanic rifts, you know, you may say, there's no reason for that at the Jahai Bluffs, and that's fine. The Code and Torch Mastery, you may say there's no reason for that, and that's fine at the Jahai Bluffs. But these things, and there were a lot of masteries there, are things I'd like to see come forwards again. If they can find a way to get the Siren's Landing stuff going on, you know, when we're interacting with things at the Sun's Refuge, that would be kind of cool, you know? I'd like to see that sort of little bit of extra flavor, because Season 3 is just as important to me. At the end of the day, if you think about it, this season, Season 4, is giving us, what? A new mastery where we can recharge our endurance on our mountain stuff. Presumably, this will still be there when we go to the next expansion, when we go to Season 5 and beyond, whether that be in Cantha, the Char homelands, or what. So, you know, let's get that treatment on both. But yeah, it's fantastic, and another real positive for this map from me. Another really good, just broad thing about the map is lore books. They've really improved that as well. There's a ton more of them. I love the way that the devs are treating the lore books. In the, you know, in the raid, we had real books. We had a lot of detail coming out of them. Out here in the open world maps, it's a bit like with the prior release. We find lots of books all over the place, but they can be like pamphlets and notes and ripped journals and sheets of paper and stuff that just give you a little bit of extra detail about different regions of the world. What I found really fascinating is one of the books on the map is an excerpt from the introduction to one of the greatest lore documents the devs have ever written, way back in 2006, describing Cantha and the Dragon Empire. They just wholesale dumped some of that text in-game, and that makes me so happy, because that document is incredible and has never, ever, ever had a real look in-game. Well, now it does, at least in a small part, and it might encourage players to look it up on the wiki, and then they'll go on this beautiful adventure learning about Cantha. Even better, they have a book on that, and then they have another book that seems to be an equivalent, but for Elona, that they're hinting at. While, here's the funny thing, an Elonan version of that manifest never actually released to the player base. So it's kind of cool that they're suggesting that larger document might exist, even though we don't actually get it in full. So yeah, lots of little bits of lore. It's really cool to see that they're utilizing that lorebook UI to a heavy degree now. You know, Istam wasn't that long ago. That was when we first got it, and now the devs, I think, are really starting to find their feet. So, that's the broad stuff about the map. Let's talk specifics. Again, I've kind of done one sweep of the map so far. I have done it in accordance with the story, and there are many highlights I want to deliver. First of all, I'll do a little bit of spoilers here. So, if you're really scared about spoilers for the release, only skip ahead on this video about 5 minutes. This is all I'll really spoil. But let's talk about the center of the map. The story here, and this is only a vague spoiler, really, is that, remember last episode where we opened a rift in space and time, and we said, oh, that's probably a bad idea. I can't believe we're able to do that. Let's not do it again. Well, lots of rifts in space and time have started opening up. And as you explore this map, you will find areas of it that are other areas of time and space that have just been plopped into the desert. Okay, so you get these 3 central places here. The displaced towers, question mark, and the jungle anomaly. So let's talk about them. First of all, the jungle anomaly. Remember that we saw the Maguma jungle in the trailer? And I was like, I don't know why they're doing that. They must just be showing wyverns. I am too much of a cynic. They did that because the Maguma jungle is in this release. This little chunk of the map is like Tangled Depths. It's really deep. There's tons of verticality. Like, this vista is super high. There's chuck everywhere there. It feels like I'm in HOT. And you, like, just transition so beautifully. I love how the game as a platform has got to the point where it's got so many assets they can play with as devs now and environment artists that they can completely change your experience. There are areas of this map as well with more of these anomalies that spawn. They like dynamically spawn all over the place, like rifts, right? Sometimes there'll be like snowing. I kind of like the idea that one will fill with water and we'll suddenly have water gameplay, you know, out in the desert somewhere. That would be incredible. But yeah, they get so many different aesthetics, but especially when you get here, if you're wondering why there's ley lines and all that kind of stuff, it's because, hey, this is like HOT right here. And if you're a HOT player, you can travel around it really comfortably. That's not it all though, guys. This one here as well, I guess we'll talk more about in the story video. This is ore during a period of time when the Char were attacking, which is such a prominent and important, monumental aspect of this game's world building and lore that we have never seen. Not in a fractal, not in a dungeon, not in a flashback. Never, ever, ever seen. And in this release, we get to see it, as well as some juicy details and a beautiful poem that I'm not intelligent enough with literature, really, to interpret. Maybe you guys want to talk about. That's super fantastic. And then lastly, I mean, what the hell? This one here is like a mysterious mushroomy cave with creepy music that you hallucinate in, but that the characters theorize is not necessarily from another place in time, not necessarily another place in space on Tyria. Another world. This patch is the first time, despite the hints we've had at it in lore and discussions about it in lore, that we see another world, another planet on Tyria, and it's like an alien landscape. Wow, and we actually get that in the game. I mean, how can't you geek out about these? These are so awesome. And they're all just there as a part of the map that you can just casually, regularly explore in the Jahai Bluffs. Beautiful stuff. I'd geek out more, but I only warned people for the spoiler that you'd have 5 minutes. So there you go. Beautiful. Getting back to some other more generic aspects of the patch. I say generic, but they're still very exciting. What do we see here? A tornado. Yes, there's a new mechanic here. It's got a beautiful map icon. There is... I want to use the phrase dynamic weather, but that's probably disingenuous. There's basically an enormous thing called a Claw of Kraukatoric. You can see it here. That rampages around the map as an enormous tornado. And it will intersect with various dynamic events and NPCs and stuff you might be doing. It will suck you into it, as we've seen this tech that they've had in recent releases. And if you get pulled right into the middle, it launches you into the air and you start spinning around. It's beautiful. My first experience of this tornado was I was doing a dynamic event where we were escorting a new category of golems, dragon elimination raid vehicles, I think they were called, and there were many of us players, and we escorted it through them through the brand. We came to a choke point, and it just so happened that the tornado was at the choke point, so all the players doing the escort of these golems suddenly got caught by the tornado, thrown in the air, disoriented. And if you think it's fun being caught into one of these tornadoes just on your own, imagine what it's like when you have a small collection of players also floating around chaotically. And it interacts with the griffin flying and gliding. It launches you so high in the air as well. What you realize is super high in the sky in the Jahai Bluffs, there's like leyline magic and unbound magic you can collect, or just unbound magic, you can collect floating around in the sky. and there's still that sense of very real verticality. You know, we're in a desert map, dealing with branded and stuff, but you look at the size of the cliffs, these gorgeous environments we travel through, and now you're miles off in the sky. It's incredible. It like unlocks these extra areas of exploration to get mastery points super high up and whatnot. And these tornadoes do naturally just patrol the brand. The brand is the brand storm, you know, and the devs are showing like every aspect of that wind and rain and lightning combining together here. These tornadoes are so cool. So yeah, I touched on it a little bit there as well. But another general thing I'll applaud with the map is there's just a lot of different environments, not just because of the anomalies and whatnot, but the branded areas do feel very distinct to, say, the Attendee village we get to return to from Guild Wars 1, to some of the southern areas. There's a bit of Awakened stuff in there. My favorite area, as you guys may know, if you watch a lot of me, is from Heart of Thorns in the Burnisher Quarry with all those beautiful red rock canyons and stuff. Truly beautiful. I had it as a dynamic desktop background for ages, and while this map has that just turbocharged. Look at this place. Look at how beautiful it is. I haven't been able to resist on Twitter this week, constantly tweeting various vistas and cinemagraphs of this map because it's just that phenomenal looking. Talking about some other specific areas, there is a worm farm. Once again, we get that nice little flavor. It's not new to this map, but I will once again applaud it that when you're traveling around Living World Season 4 maps, you see a lot of actual NPCs that are core NPCs to the story just out there. Like in the previous release, we saw Ritlock hanging around on the map. Here you start to see more big, interesting characters, and you get a lot of interesting dialogue with them. You can go to Worm Master Ecolo, for example. She talks once again about how she respects us, and you can interact with a picture like her kid drew for us. It really does a cool thing here where it shows some Awakened really are perfectly fine, cool, realistic human-feeling entities in the world, while others are the same. They're just angry with you and an enemy faction. So the worm farm was really nice. It was always good to see more Janundu stuff, because to me that was a big part of Alona and Nightfall, and I don't feel like this expansion's done enough with them just yet. Lots of hints about more of those coming later on, I suppose. Another really cool area you get to go to is the Fortress of Jahai. So I talked about that earlier in the week. It was a big prominent landmark from Corner, second only probably to Gandara. And, well, we get to see what it's like in Guild Wars 2, 250 years later. And unlike Gandara, it's not all super awakened and crazy here. It's actually still an enormous, beautiful citadel. And we get such a vast, interesting ability to explore it compared to what it was like in the original game. In fact, some of the opening story in the entire patch has you come here after visiting the Chantry of Secrets. Chantry of Secrets being a landmark too, which was very exciting to first visit, but I don't think the devs have done too much with, unless I'm missing stuff. I was excited to see that behind one of the waterfalls there was a breakable beetle wall, and that indeed all the statues of the gods still exist, that even the Cormyr statue, the very first one, also still exists and wasn't destroyed by Joko. I really respect that the devs took the opportunity to leave that place intact rather than have it destroyed. But I do think we're missing a bit of story about the Order of Shadows, the Order of Whispers, and how they could have utilized it and why the Chantry is no longer being used. I suppose they've both got new Chantries now, and that's just sort of the answer. Either that or I'm missing some interesting dynamic event dialogue. Speaking of dynamic events, let's talk about another thing to the south of the map. There's a really exciting, interesting place called the Codiner Temple. So Codiner is a name you might recognize as a Guild Wars 1 player. This area of the world was known as the Codiner Crossroads before. And indeed, if you look slightly to the south on the map here, last release had the Codiner Crossing too, which was actually where it was. But this release has the Codiner Temple, and it's a great place because when you go there, you get to interact a lot with Jinn. So first of all, the dynamic event I was alluding to. There's a dynamic event I started and I haven't finished yet, where a Jinn is talking, and remember the Jinn can resist the brand, is talking about how they are supposed to meet up with another Jinn, but they're missing, so let's go find them. You do this escort, and I did this solo, which ultimately reveals the Jinn can be branded, and it triggers a really exciting legendary mob you have to fight with various burn phases where you have to break brand crystals at certain windows. But because I was the only one there, plus like a single ranger who wasn't doing very much, I failed the event in the end. But it was so exciting getting all of that lore, and that's kind of a theme with Jahai. Every dynamic event you do, you kind of feel like you're getting some real exposition and decent backstory. You guys know I've been playing a lot of the core game over the most recent months, and it's really cool to see that in Jahai, The devs keep throwing nods back there. We're hearing much more about Pact, specific characters we knew once long ago. Some of these new golems, for example, at the Pact area, if you sit around and listen to the Asura speaking, they'll talk about the College of Dynamics and how they're actually involved with this stuff. And it's good to hear about the colleges. It's good to hear about the lodges at Holbrack and whatnot, because it makes the entire game feel like a cohesive whole instead of, you know, this whole separate little thing that's moved on from everything that was once upon a time important. Back to the Codinor Temple, the other thing you'll see here, obviously, is this bounty board. And what's great about this, another nice little touch, is obviously this release added the raid too, and I've already done some coverage on that. You can expect more soon. But what the devs did was directly talk about the new raid wing here in game. So there is no portal, unfortunately, to the Mystic Forge here. But the Order of Shadows will talk about, hey, Zomoros is in some kind of battle, some kind of wager. Maybe you should go to the raid to check it out. And I love the way that the devs are feeding players naturally through all their various systems. That's what feels AAA to me. The dialogue he triggers in general is just pretty cool as well. So the Djinn were fascinating, and it's an awesome area to go. There's even an adventure there, a Griffin expert race, which I've not even touched as of making this video. There's still so much more content to get through. And the bounties themselves too, I haven't done just yet in this video. Be sure to keep talking to those bounty board NPCs, guys, because they are actually updating the dialogue. I know at Path of Fire they all felt pretty generic filler, but they're not at that point anymore. Returning to other key areas of the map, I did mention at the start of this video, it's not just the Jahai Bluffs we got. Other maps are there too. That's why we get the Chantry of Secrets. Well, nearly also all of Churai's procession appears here too. And we get pretty close to the Ventus Cemetery and stuff. These were places I had no expectation of being able to visit in this release, but the devs gave it to us. That means the Ancestor Tree returns. This great tree, magical entity revered by the Centaurs, seems suspiciously similar in some ways to the Pale Tree. And was there going to be some kind of Sylvari reference? I've been looking forward to visiting here in Guild Wars 2 for years now, long before Path of Fire and all of that. Well, I don't really see much lore there yet, but I did sit around and try and do some events. I saw a lot of players were there. I think it might be tied to some of the collections, and I may have more news on it for you later. In fact, the Djinn I think I found there may have had something to do with the Djinn events I was talking about from completely other area in the map. So I wonder what's going on. They seem to be telling some kind of big story. It's not just the Ancestor Tree. That area of the map looks gorgeous. We don't get all the way up to the Desolation, and I'm looking forward to mixing it up by going back there maybe next release. And the other big sort of landmark on the map as well that I've got to talk about is, of course, the Monument to Balawa Joko. So it is there. You can see it. It's a Guild Wars 2 interpretation of it, and it's pretty awesome. When I arrived there, I saw that it was in the midst of a pretty large dynamic event where the Awakened were gathering around there, hoping that Joko was being revived and coming back to life, and this would be his point of entry back into the world, much as it was after the ending of his imprisonment and banishment before. And our job is to sort of show that this is the Awakened being deceived and being manipulated by Awakened Mesmers. And there was a lot of dialogue there. I wish I'd seen the start of the event and what rolls into it, because once the event ended, there really wasn't any dialogue I could get. There wasn't an interactable, unfortunately, where I could press F and learn a lot about the tomb. And unfortunately, we don't get to go into the tomb either. It's still just the monument on top. And Guild Wars 2 acts like there's nothing underneath it at all. Which is a bit of a shame. I will note that there is a chance the tomb is somewhere really far away, and when Joko was released, he was just, like, teleported out of it all the way to the monument for some arbitrary reason. And that's totally a thing, maybe, so maybe we'll get the tomb elsewhere. But yeah, there is some touches on Joko. There's even, like, Joko voice acting because of events like this in this release, but it really does take a bit more of a backseat than I was expecting. I thought the whole release would be themed around the fallout of Joko, but it's not as much as I thought. What they do is very good, and certainly in the main story there's some very good stuff. But I was happy to see the monument came back. They hadn't been destroyed. I think a realistic interpretation of the intervening 250 years would have been that Joko would have destroyed it. That's a representation of his failure on Tyria, and he probably would have wanted no one to know about it, especially with the way we understand he's propagandized the world. But they didn't do that. Speaking of which as well, other cool little thing is when you first get to the Jahai Bluffs, the devs kind of ask you to waypoint to the Vitendi Academy. So your first experience of this whole release is looking at their schooling and all the propaganda and stuff for Joko and remembering that just after you've killed him, and then you move on to the new map slightly below. So yeah, finally, there is a world boss here. There is the idea of lots of metas on this map, truthfully, but the big world boss is the Shatterer. And I'm kind of geeking out over it pretty bad because you guys know I love the Shatterer. It is a death-touched Shatterer, a Shatterer that has tapped into some of Zaitan's power, and it's a fascinating event. It's like Shatterer 2.0 in that it has the break bars there, it has the gliding aspects to it there, but then it has more mechanics layered on top. It has some of the new Vortex style things from the most recent expansion. It has Griffin stuff. You can actually fly on rented Griffins nearby and lance certain mist-walking NPCs that are supporting the Shatterer with a special action hotkey as you fly overhead on them, and various other mechanics too. It's that same setup of the Vigil versus it, just like we saw in Blaze Ridge Steps all that time ago, except now the devs aren't scared to have game-critical NPCs there, like Almora, who will actually participate. Hero-chan is there too. I heard a hint from one of you guys in the community over on my Twitter that there's another interesting character that appears there who I haven't seen yet. And here's the thing, guys, I haven't beat it yet, which makes me over the moon, because if they just added that and it was a really easy fight that, you know, you just sort of face rolled through, it would have been robbed of some of its urgency and intrigue. But because I haven't beaten it, well, it's a little bit more exciting, and guess what? I'll be streaming literally later today. We're gonna gather up and have that experience, like that core experience of once again taking out the Shatterer. It's got all these cool phases where I guess I won't talk about some of the other stuff because it's a little bit spoilery, but where it connects to the mists and stuff. Man, what a world boss. And yeah, that's really one of the last big things that I want to focus on that keeps us spoiler-free in general and clear of the other stuff in the patch. Gorgeous stuff. It's had immense applaud and feedback on the forums and other areas as well, guys. So don't just take my word for it. Have a look around, and definitely, if you haven't played this release, this is the one to have a look at. It was already probably my favorite release in a long time, if not maybe ever, before I played the story. And then that just added a whole other pile of things to talk about. So yeah, I'll keep you guys updated about more Jahai stuff as the week goes along. Give me your comments about really awesome other nuggets and things you want the internet to know about. I'll gather them up and you will see more follow-ups. We'll treat this as a bit of a first impressions as the patch is new, and I will give you more. There will also be very soon story videos coming, so make sure you've played that and you're not worried about spoilers, because the lid will be coming off very rapidly. So cheers guys, hope you enjoyed. Thanks very much for watching. I'll see you next time.